Hello, everyone, and welcome to Here Goes Everything. My name is Brianna.
And my name is Barbara. For today's episode 4, we will be speaking about our relationship with guilt, shame, and remorse. I know what you may be thinking, but aren't guilt and remorse the same thing?
The answer is no. Remorse comes from the heart, while guilt springs from your ego mind. Remorse is a feeling of deep regret, whereas guilt is only the acknowledgement that you have done something wrong.
It is necessary to point out that when you are truly remorseful, not only do you acknowledge that you have done something wrong, but you also take the necessary steps to undo that damage that has been caused. You may even feel deep regret because of it, but you still have to make a real effort to make up for it. That is what shows remorse. Now, it is important to note that guilt may lead to destructive tendencies and behaviors, whereas remorse leads to more constructive actions. In other words, feeling guilty lacks taking actual responsibility for your harmful actions. The focus is more on recognizing and feeling bad for what you have done, oftentimes leading to self-destructive behaviors that hinder you from actually making a true effort to make up for what has been done. After doing something wrong, guilt eats at you. You tend to end up feeling far more sorry for yourself than for the act itself. After leading with self-destructive behaviors because of these emotions, you end up amplifying the feeling of guilt and shame, which only expands the problem.
Well said. A guilt complex can have a serious impact on a person's overall well-being. When we act in a way that we are not proud of, our brain broadcasts a signal that prompts us to alter our conduct. This alone can lead to depression, anxiety, and even paranoia. Guilt may also affect a person's sense of self-worth and self-esteem.
Yes, I feel like guilt very much plays a role in what a person's self-worth and self-esteem looks like. Because it is often tied to shame, having negative feelings that are directed at yourself is common when experiencing feelings of guilt. This can very well cause you to have emotional outbursts that keep you from taking full accountability for your actions. Shame is a focus on self, while guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did something bad. When you mix guilt with shame, you lose sight of what can be done to make a situation better. Because of the shame that you are feeling, you can be strongly fixated on I am bad instead of I did something wrong, but I can fix the problem. I can do something to make it better. Someone who feels shame regrets some aspect of who they are as a person. This is why someone that is experiencing guilt and shame at the same time can lead to unhealthy patterns of behaviors. These behaviors are often triggered by a self-blaming attitude that does not involve constructive behaviors that can lead to self-accountability. Again, guilt can be tied to feeling regretful, but purely because the person is wanting to avoid punishment or feelings that come with doing something wrong, such as shame. On the contrary, when you are feeling remorseful, your intent is to avoid hurtful actions towards others in the future because it is wrong. Remorse says, I did something wrong. I'm sorry. Let me make it up to you. It also focuses on taking steps to avoid hurting a person again. When you feel guilty, I feel like you may be more likely to be sympathetic towards the person, whereas if you are feeling remorseful, you are more likely to be empathetic towards them. There is a disconnect between you and the other person's feelings when experiencing guilt. But when you are feeling remorseful, there is the acknowledgement of having done something wrong, but there is also the consideration and true understanding of the other person's feelings. To make this clear, sympathy involves understanding from your own perspective, while empathy involves putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they may have these particular feelings.
I love that so much. I really like how you explain the difference between sympathy and empathy. They are two very different things, but it's really easy to mix up the two. So I'm really glad you explained the difference between them and the role that they play in feeling guilty. So thank you.
Of course.
Barbara mentioned that when you feel guilty, you may be more likely to be sympathetic towards a person, whereas if you're feeling remorseful, you are more likely to be empathetic towards them. One thing I believe is really important is to remember that this not only plays a role in your relationships with others, but the relationship you have with yourself as well. For example, if you're struggling with an eating disorder or you're trying to lose weight by cutting some calories, and let's say you end up eating an entire chocolate bar and you feel guilty about it, you begin to shame yourself for eating it. It's very important for you to just empathize with yourself. Tell yourself everything is okay. If you have a setback, having empathy for yourself allows you to get back up and move forward. However, feeling guilt and shame will prevent you from bouncing back after any setback.
That is such a great point. I honestly hadn't thought about it before you, up until you mentioned it. But practicing self empathy can really go a long way. I couldn't agree with you more on that aspect of things.
Thank you.
Thank you for addressing that.
Of course. I actually thought about it because I thought to myself, okay, we're talking about our relationships with others. However, sometimes we deal with that within ourselves. So I just thought it'd be important to keep that in mind also.
Yes, it's definitely just as important. Now, again, practicing self empathy can go a long way, just as you mentioned, and it almost goes hand in hand with resilience.
It does.
I feel like without self empathy, you can't really bounce back from your experience, you can't really bounce back from your mistakes. And it's highly important for you to be able to do this for yourself. It is what resilience is all about. Self-empathy is the acknowledgement that, like all human beings, you deserve understanding and compassion. To truly practice self-empathy to its fullest, you must be willing to use it even when you trip over your own feet and make mistakes that leave you feeling embarrassed, ashamed, and guilty. In order to move forward from any feelings of shame, you have to be able to forgive yourself. You have to be able to be compassionate towards yourself. This is what will allow you to make healthier choices when you hurt others or do anything to hurt yourself, whether it is intentional or not.
Exactly. It's really important for us to be compassionate towards ourselves. Going back to speaking about guilt, I wanted to talk about how to deal with guilt for those that sometimes find themselves feeling guilty and struggle with tuning in with that feeling of remorse. I believe that it is important to not punish yourself when you have done something that you regret. And the reason I say this is that sometimes we get stuck feeling bad for ourselves and believe that we deserve to be punished for our mistakes. But it is not like that. It is so important that you do not punish yourself when you made a mistake. At some point, you have to learn from it and not repeat it. With that also comes forgiving yourself. I myself have struggled with forgiving myself for saying or doing something that may have hurt someone else. However, it is so important to practice self-forgiveness when you are feeling guilty and ashamed. This alone is an important component to enjoying life and relationships. Accepting that you are wrong also plays a major role in overcoming guilt. The more you focus on what you did wrong, the more it will bother you and interfere with your life. It'll become a never-ending cycle.
Yes, and not breaking the cycle can really take a toll on your health, whether it is emotional, mental, or physical. It can also take a toll on your relationships with others and the relationship with yourself.
Exactly.
Those that often experience guilt and shame may feel that they don't deserve to move on and may engage in behaviors designed to punish themselves for their mistakes. They are more inclined to take unreasonable measures in order to beat themselves up over it. This can add to the stressful and hurtful situation instead of making it better. Unhealthy guilt is experienced as a lingering and exaggerated sense of guilt that is out of proportion to the original situation. We end up feeling bad about ourselves, and as Brianna mentioned, it very well contributes to depression and having a low self-esteem. Worst of all, it inhibits us from learning from our mistakes and very quickly chips away at our self-confidence.
Yes. I feel like a lot of people who live with guilt tend to believe that apologizing to a person after they have done something wrong is also enough. However, simply saying sorry does not make it a complete and authentic apology. In order for it to be a true apology, the person must first acknowledge the offense that was committed and take full acceptance and responsibility for what was done. That's the number one thing. It is so important to take a step back, acknowledge your mistake, accept it, and take full responsibility for it. Afterwards, a sincere expression of remorse and commitment to not repeat the behavior must be shown. If you're not showing that you are truly committed to making, committed to making sure that this mistake is not repeated, I feel like that alone already shows that you're feeling guilt and not remorse. And last of all, the person must offer to repair the damage that has been done or find a way to resolve the issue. If you're not offering to fix your mistake at that moment, it's almost as if you're apologizing in order to move on from your mistake and not truly trying to move forward from it. I feel like that's what a sincere apology is all about. Truly taking it all in, taking responsibility for your actions, and allowing yourself to move forward and not just move on from it.
Exactly, because there really is a difference.
Yes.
And now, most people's natural response after doing something wrong is, for the most part, to look inward. But this isn't always a positive thing. It can be a great thing if you allow it to be, but many times it's not. And, it doesn't always mean that the person is holding themselves responsible for their actions. For many, looking inward leads to feelings of shame and guilt. Of course, these are emotions that are bound to make us very uncomfortable, especially when the person that is hurt is holding us accountable and addressing that we did something wrong. Because we so badly want to get rid of these aching feelings, we rush into giving an apology, but we skip the self-reflection process and we skip being mindful of the other person's feelings. Why? Because we are more concerned. We are more concerned.
It happens. I've been there.
Because we are more focused on our own. We are more concerned with our own feelings. We skip the part where we deeply analyzed what we could do to not only make things better in that very moment, but to also prevent these harmful behaviors from occurring again. Like Brianna stated, these are all indicators that a genuine apology is not being given. This shows that the person is not truly remorseful, but that they are experiencing guilt and shame. The unfortunate thing about this is that the person's shame is often associated with the perception of their self-worth and not so much with the action itself. They feel far more sorry for themselves for having done something wrong instead of truly feeling sorry for the person that is hurting, for the person that they hurt. This leaves the person that was hurt to begin with standing alone. It leaves them feeling more pain. It especially brings them more stress when they have to witness the same person that hurt them inflict more pain by self-destructing because they feel that they deserve it or because they feel that they need to punish themselves for what they did wrong.
And that's honestly never the way to go. As I was saying earlier, many times people believe that when they've made a mistake and they have hurt someone, they are bad individuals who deserve the worst. But they don't. We are all human, we all make mistakes, but we really have to learn from them. Our mistakes do not automatically label us as terrible individuals. There are so many things that we can do to break these repetitive behaviors. It's not easy to put in the work, but if you truly desire change, you can do it. Do it for yourself and for the sake of your relationships with others. If you do not take the time to learn how to be remorseful and understand how your reactions affect others, you'll end up losing many people throughout your life. If you continue to repeat the same behaviors without taking full responsibility for your actions, you're not being fair to the person that you hurt, and you're not being fair to yourself.
I agree. I feel like it's good to feel bad about having done something wrong, but if it comes to a point where you are beating yourself up over it, it becomes very unhealthy. It takes you many steps back, and instead of this being a good thing, and it ends up being a terrible thing because this alone keeps you from focusing on the primary issue, which is the fact that you hurt someone. It is very counterproductive.
And not just that, but sometimes this can make the other person feel responsible for your pain. And now they're trying to make you feel better, but it doesn't make sense. If you did something to hurt me, why am I now comforting you? The moment that you shut down and you shame yourself by telling yourself that you're a bad person or that you deserve the worst, you're not being fair to the person that you hurt because you're making them responsible for you.
It's like you are unintentionally making yourself the victim.
That's exactly what it is. And at that point, you're undermining the seriousness of your actions and acting like your feelings are far more important than the feelings of a person that you hurt.
Yes. And I've been on both ends of that situation, and so it's just a terrible situation to be in all around. I actually just had a thought that came to me, and
I'm like, okay, let's do it.
bear with me.
Okay.
The best example that I can think of to put all of this into perspective is a hit and run.
Oh, wow. I'm like, okay.
I know, it's kind of random, but it's the best example that I could think of.
Okay.
Think about it. Say you were to hit a car. Now, there are obviously a lot of emotions that can be experienced throughout a situation like this one. Guilt and shame being two of them. But what do many do after doing something like this? They run. They choose to flee. And they try to run away from the responsibility of their actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that guilt and shame are present because I'm almost positive that the reason that they fled is because there was some kind of recognition of having done something wrong.
Of course.
I'm sure they thought about it. And
Yeah.
we also know that there was a lack of remorse because had there been a sign of remorse, the person that committed this act would have stayed, despite knowing that it would be an uncomfortable situation to be in. They would have stayed, and they would have made sure that the person that they hit with their vehicle was okay. They would have taken responsibility for their actions and found a way to make up for them. When we do something wrong, we are often quick to run. It is almost a natural instinct to want to run. Sometimes, and terribly enough, we are even quick to blame and to shame the person that is calling us out for doing something that was not okay. But that is a cowardly act. It's terrible that we have normalized blaming and shaming the people who are challenging us to be better.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's important to be challenged.
It is.
That's how we learn, you know? From time to time, we have to have someone that puts us in our place.
That was you for me.
Yeah, we have to hold each other accountable.
Exactly.
And, you know, it takes courage to accept the consequences of your actions. We all make mistakes, but what matters most is how we deal with them, how we respond to them.
Wow.
And
I'm like, oh, there's more. Okay,
there's
go ahead.
More. I don't know. We have to know that our actions and mistakes will always follow us one way or another. If we don't address them head on, they will continue to affect our relationship with others, and they will continue to affect us.
You know, I really like the. Sorry. I'm like, I don't know what I did. Give me one moment.
Go ahead.
I really like the fact that you kind of put this into perspective and you gave us an example. And earlier, I was speaking about how when you live with guilt, it can lead to depression, anxiety, and even paranoia.
Right.
So what I was thinking when you were explaining this whole
Scenario.
hit and run scenario, what came to mind is this person fled, right?
Yes.
Because they felt guilt
And shame.
and shame.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, in the long run, they may be dealing with anxiety and paranoia. Just
That's
knowing that they
true.
fled alone, like it's going to haunt them. It's going to be there. So if they're driving on the road, maybe the person saw their license plates, maybe the police are looking for them. They're going to eventually, like,
The consequences.
the consequences are going to catch up to them.
Right.
But I can guarantee you, they're most likely out there living with that anxiety and that
fear.
paranoia that they're going to be found, that they're going to have to face their consequences.
Exactly. And so you might as well, this is obviously like a more elevated scenario. But this is why it's so important to address your mistakes head on
Yeah.
and to not run away from them.
And it's not easy, but I want to talk about victim blaming and what it looks like to have a victim mentality. Comments such as, why are you acting like this? And this is not fair. So let's say I hurt you. I hurt your emotions by saying something mean. I said something that wasn't fair to you out of frustration for whatever reason. And you're holding me accountable by trying to have a conversation about it. You then tell me that you didn't appreciate the way that I spoke to you and that you were hurt by it. Throughout all of this, I start to feel embarrassed and ashamed. I start to feel guilty because of my own deep-rooted traumas. My automatic response is to defend myself. I become defensive. And in that moment, I somehow find a way to shift the blame on you.
Yes.
I want to talk about that. Because I feel like it's such an important thing to speak about, like victim blaming.
It's a tough place to be in. Again,
That's why it's important to
don't know.
take responsibility for your actions, because you can very well, if you don't, how do I say it? If you don't ever learn to take responsibility for your own actions, that alone can even lead you to victim blaming without even intentionally trying to sometimes.
exactly. And I don't know. I feel like I've often been victim blamed.
You're like, is that the right word to say?
I've often been blamed despite being a victim. No, I'm kidding. I don't like to call myself the victim, but yes, in my relationships with significant others or even friends, there's always been that shift in
The like putting the blame on
me
on you.
and you can't really work with that.
Exactly. I'm like, I just felt the need to kind of bring it up, but we'll go back to it. We'll come back to it.
Okay. So, something to think about is that you typically experience black and white thinking when feeling guilt and shame, whereas when you are feeling remorseful, you are able to look at the bigger picture.
Yes.
This allows you to focus more on a real solution instead of focusing on what may seem like a solution at that very moment. Again, punishing yourself is never a solution to making a mistake. Punishing the other person for addressing what you have done wrong also isn't a solution. Two negatives does not make a positive. This is also very counterproductive.
It sure is.
And it can create a lot more problems in the long run.
I really want to quickly say that I'm so proud of us for continuing to get through the podcast, even though we made like little mistakes because sometimes we're like, oh, like
Little and big, we get tongue tied, and
it's so easy to want to like put the like end the podcast and just start over. So I'm really
Right.
proud of us for kind of working through it, and we're like, it's okay.
And we would like to add that, we're hungry, and
We're tired.
that may also play a role. We woke up at 6 in the morning, but we went to sleep late, but
I just want to say I'm proud of us.
we're
I'm proud of
here.
you.
We're making the effort because we would really like to share this with you guys, and we hope that you can learn from it.
Mhm.
And yes, if you hear anything unusual,
Bear with us.
yes, thank you.
But, you and I both have always encouraged people to be vulnerable. So I'm going to be vulnerable and share a little bit about my own experience with this.
Okay.
So I've actually come a long way within the last year or so. I know you've seen it. Growing up, I dealt a lot with feeling the need to defend myself. And I dealt with a lot of traumatic experiences. For this reason, I was always kind of in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. For those that don't know the fight, flight, or freeze response, it refers to involuntary, physiological changes that happen in your body and mind when a person feels threatened. So, this response exists to kind of keep you safe and a lot of times prepares you to defend yourself, deflect, or even dissociate in order to avoid danger. So everyone's kind of different, but for me, it was always like fight, flight, or freeze. That's what I was stuck in.
Right.
So I was often blamed and shamed for things that were not my fault growing up. I had to take responsibility and the blame for a lot of things to make other people feel better. So growing up, I was always stuck in that mode. And this was always my response to uncomfortable situations. So I couldn't move past feeling attacked. For me, most of the time, it was in fight mode. So I couldn't get past the feeling of feeling attacked, even when I wasn't being attacked. For a big part of my life, I was mostly in that fight mode, and I felt the need to always defend myself no matter what. I experienced a lot of black and white thinking, and this is why I really appreciated the connection that you made with guilt, shame, and black and white thinking. I lived it, so I understand it, and I feel like whether I did something that is my fault or not, I've learned to just go to defending myself. I found a way to not take ownership for my actions because it's almost like I couldn't take responsibility for someone else anymore, and this in the long run became a problem. It complicated my relationships with others because in the moments where I did do something wrong, I struggled to empathize with the person that I hurt, and I wouldn't listen to them because I was only focused on protecting myself. So that kind of caused it caused me to not really empathize again with the other person, and it created a problem.
Right.
Because no matter what, I was trying if you address something with me, I was going to defend myself no matter what. I didn't care to listen. It was I need to protect myself because this is the only thing that I've learned.
Exactly.
To automatically protect myself. So instead of taking the time to listen to the person that I hurt, understand the ways in which I hurt them and take responsibility for my actions, I was always ready to just get up and go. Okay, no matter what it was, I'm going to defend myself and I'm going to stand my ground. And I really struggled with this in the beginning of our relationship because you're not afraid of holding someone accountable for their actions. Whether it be a major or minor incident, you really prioritize communication, and you're really good at addressing it in a way in which I shouldn't have felt attacked. But because of my traumas, any time you would try to hold me accountable, I'd feel shame and I'd either fight or flee.
And it makes sense because you did grow up in a very unsafe environment where you were often shamed for things that you were not responsible for. You didn't really have a support system, so your brain was wired to protect itself. And so it became an unhealthy coping mechanism eventually. it became your natural reaction, even when you weren't threatened.
Exactly.
Threatened?
Exactly, though. Honestly, therapy has helped me so much to work through that. And we're not at a point where we can communicate with one another, but I now take the time to listen and understand you. And it hasn't been easy, but I can take responsibility for my actions now. And it's not easy, like I said again, but when you take the time to realize that guilt and shame jeopardize your relationships, it makes it easier to want to put in the work. I knew that with me constantly being in that fight, flight, or freeze, it wasn't fair to Barbara. I knew that with me not taking the time to listen to her, I was hurting her. And I didn't want to lose her. I loved her and I didn't want to jeopardize our relationship. So I told myself, I'm going to put in the work and I'm going to fix this. And that's one thing I told her. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make this better. And that's the one thing that comes with remorse. It's telling yourself, I'm going to fix this and I'm not going to let this be a repetitive cycle where I just tell you I'm sorry, but then it happens again. I apologize to you for the things that I did or said to hurt you, but I also told myself I was going to do something to assure that it didn't happen again, and I did. So one thing that I also wanted to mention that I believe is so important because I struggled with it is if you did something wrong, do not wait for the person that you hurt to come to you. Do not be afraid to take the first step. A lot of times I felt so guilty that I would avoid addressing the problem.
I feel like sometimes you were in fight mode, but other times you were in flee mode. So yes, you would avoid me to avoid the discomfort of having that conversation about what you did wrong.
Exactly, but that's not fair to you. How is it fair for me to avoid you and shut you out when I was the one that hurt you? It's not fair, and you shouldn't have to be the one that comes to me first. I did something to hurt you. I should be the one opening up that conversation and apologizing to you. And it did take me a while to get there, but it's great to look back in the areas where I fell short, and I'm proud of myself for being able to get back up and be better when it comes to this. I'm sharing my experience because I want people to learn the importance of remorse and empathizing with others. Our relationship has been the best now that I have overcome the feeling of guilt and the need to defend myself all the time. I know now how to give you a genuine apology from the heart. And a lot of times I would also apologize in order to just make things better in the moment, but I wouldn't really take the time to reflect. I just wanted things to be okay, so I would essentially try to move on from the problem and I wouldn't focus on what was truly important. Reflection is so important, and guilt will literally consume you if you don't face it.
Exactly. And, I would like to take the time to say that I'm really proud of you too.
Thank you.
It means the world to me for you to have taken that step towards, working on listening and understanding and, being compassionate towards my experience and the way I feel about it.
I feel like that's how I always was, but I went through so much that I was so stuck in this repetitive cycle and I couldn't get out of it. And so now that I finally was able to remove myself from the people who hurt me, I'm finally able to truly work on myself and work in the areas that I needed to improve on.
Exactly. And I will say, I feel like you have also come a long way with being compassionate towards yourself, with yourself. And that has improved your relationship with yourself by a lot.
Yes, honestly.
If that makes sense.
Yes. I used to beat myself up a lot over things. Honestly, you were really patient with me throughout all of it, and you simply telling me that these things could be worked out helped me be more patient towards myself. It took a lot of communicating, but most importantly, it took listening for me to finally learn from my mistakes.
And being compassionate towards yourself, even after making a mistake that... Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And even being compassionate towards yourself helped keep you from wanting to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
It has also kept you from wanting to push me away because you feel like you don't deserve me.
Oh gosh,
But,
yeah.
I've always made sure to tell you that it isn't about you not deserving me. It's about me not deserving the pain that you are putting me through. It's about me simply deserving better. It is you that I want to be with. And so, I don't know, at some point I got through to you and you finally decided to change your mindset. You finally stopped shaming yourself to the point of losing yourself, and in the process starting to lose me. And I think what helped is the fact that I was in the same place when we were younger. It's something that I am able to really understand for that reason. We've actually spoken quite a bit about this, but we kind of switched places, didn't we?
We did.
When we were younger, I was the self-destructive one. I was the one who wasn't taking responsibility for my actions. And I was honestly a huge coward. I often ran away from my mistakes and hurtful actions. And I hurt you so much when we were younger. And it is a deep regret of mine to have not been big enough to direct my efforts towards, making things better instead of torturing myself over it and in the process hurting you even more because of it.
At that point in my life, I was the one talking to you and helping you through it. I was the one that was telling you that everything was going to be okay and that your mistakes didn't make you a bad person. So it's kind of crazy how we did switch roles.
Yes, and you were also very patient with me, but I couldn't ever believe that I was a good person. I thought that I was the worst, and so I did a lot of things to hurt myself for that reason. I started drinking a lot of alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and just harming myself in all sorts of ways instead of being there for you because I was hurting you. Because of this, I not only lost myself, but I lost you too.
It's very crazy to think about how different we were then and how different we were when we came into this relationship 10 years later. Back then, I was a lot more mindful and more held together. And then we lost touch, and then we found each other again. And now I was the one drinking and smoking and just kind of, losing myself. I was so lost. I'd experienced so much trauma throughout the time that we lost touch, but you were very put together, and I was like, whoa, who are you? We really switched places, and then you were the one trying to piece me back together afterwards.
Yes, the thing is, I was really able to mature because of all of my traumatic experiences. For you, it kind of brought you to a very low point, though. I feel like everyone has a breaking point after having to hold yourself together for so long. And, well, you also put a lot of effort into holding other people together, including me, so it only makes sense that you would eventually lose yourself in the process. But the important thing to recognize is that you were able to bounce back from all of it because, I don't know, it takes strength it takes resilience to be able to bounce back from these kinds of things, And I was able to bounce back from it as well. Even when I met you, I was, still pretty lost. I was still dealing with a lot of traumas. And I was still very much in a dark place. But I don't know, I had made a lot of progress at that point, but I still had a lot to work on and I still had a lot to heal from. But I feel like it's been great to be on both ends of the...
We understand each other more that way. It's like
exactly.
We've been in each other's shoes.
It's like the areas that I need to work on, you've kind of already figured out for yourself. And so
Vice
you help
versa.
me with those areas, and then I help you with,
Yeah.
In other areas. And we're able to create a pretty balanced relationship that way.
I'm proud of us. We've really come a long way. And when I think about it, as individuals and as a couple, we've made a lot of progress, and I love you. I love our relationship because I feel like we can sit for hours and just go on and on talking about things. It's nice to have someone that listens And it's nice being able to have healthy conversations with someone, even if it's an uncomfortable one, because I'm at a point where now I can sit with you and have an uncomfortable conversation, and it's like, hey, you know what, like, even for me, like, I sometimes didn't want to talk to you about things that bothered me because I felt weird bringing it up. And so now it's like, okay, honey, like, I didn't like when you did this, or like when you did this, it made me feel this way. And so you're like, okay, like, let's talk about it. And so we can actually sit down and have healthy conversations.
It's funny because we'll have them and then we'll kind of laugh about it at the very end.
We'll have conversations, we'll look at each other and we'll just smile and laugh. We're like, okay, we can move forward now.
And, well, I'm glad that, you were finally able to recognize that we can have healthy conversations. I tried telling you all the time, but you'd always respond with, I don't want to argue. And
I know. Honestly, I think it's because of my last relationship. Talking always led to arguing. So in my mind, when someone wants to have a serious talk, it means that it's going to turn into an argument. Even with my family, it's like my mind is so set on an argument or a talk is going to turn worse. So anytime someone wants to talk, it's going to turn into an argument, me getting tongue-tied. But, yeah, you were always like, we aren't going to argue. It's just going to be a healthy discussion. And I was like, no, like, discussions turn into arguments.
Right. And, you also did grow up in a household where it was shame to have these conversations, so I totally understand.
Right.
But I can't say it wasn't frustrating because it really was.
I mean, no one really has these important conversations in my family. It's more about ignoring the problem and moving on from it. And a lot of time they kind of have this mindset of we're family, we're blood, just forget about it, move on from it. Let's just, forget it ever happened. Or like they don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations.
How convenient.
Exactly. So I don't know. I just kind of saw it as like
a bad thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that a lot of people think. A lot of people don't know that you can actually have healthy arguments.
And I learned that from you because, I mean, you were always like, we can have a positive discussion. We can have an argument, and it doesn't have to be bad. I was always like, what do you mean an argument is an argument? And you always said, no, it can be a healthy argument where you're speaking and you're discussing things, but it doesn't have to be in such a way where it sounds so full of anger and frustration.
Yes, and I feel like the problem is that we grew up with the word argument having such a negative connotation, but in reality, all an argument is an exchange of opposite views. An argument typically involves a disagreement between you and another person, but it can really go both ways. An argument can be full of tension and anger and of uncivilized conversations, but it can also very well be a healthy argument.
You're like, help me out here.
To put it into context, I can argue that cats are the best pets to have, and you can argue that dogs are better, but it isn't necessarily something that has to involve tension and
we can
anger.
Simply we can have an argument,
a conversation. It doesn't have to involve yelling or cursing at each other. It doesn't have to involve belittling one another. All it takes is sharing our views in a respectful manner, arguing our points, listening, and taking the time to learn from each other.
I love that. I love your example because instead of I don't know, I feel like that's a great example because, yeah, you can argue that cats are better. I can argue dogs are better. And we can simply talk about that. And
they are, by the way.
Yeah, right.
It's for a different topic or a different episode.
And we can explain to one another why we believe, that cats or dogs are better. But we're not going to sit there and yell at each other for it. It's kind of like, well, I think dogs are better because this. And then you're kind of like, well, I think cats are cuter because of that. And it's like, no. And
this is more of a lighthearted conversation.
Yes.
But it's important to consider that even when it's
something very uncomfortable, it can still very well be a healthy conversation. What matters is that you keep yourself grounded and you keep a neutral tone throughout all of it and not allow it to turn into a conversation full of frustration and anger.
Exactly.
But going back to guilt, shame, and remorse, so that we can wrap things up, it is so important to stop yourself from living with guilt. Don't allow it to consume you, and take the best parts of you. Try to manage the feeling of guilt, whether it's tied to you or someone else. You're going to have setbacks, but every time it's going to get better. I guarantee it. You have to allow yourself to just learn from it and move forward from it. Don't allow guilt and shame to take away the opportunity for you to be okay. Please don't.
That's what resilience is about.
Exactly. I would also like to add that another group of people that experience a lot of guilt and shame are people that have been or are currently in abusive relationships.
And this applies to mentally, verbally, emotionally, physically, or sexually abusive relationships.
Feeling guilt and shame for wanting to leave this person is common. It's also common for victims to experience guilt and shame because they feel that what happened to them is their fault. There's so many reasons that people feel guilty and ashamed when dealing with abuse, and I feel like it's so important to talk about it.
Yes, and I can definitely resonate with that. I have been in several abusive relationships myself, but in many ways, my previous one was the worst. I experienced a lot of verbal, mental, and emotional abuse, even physical. It took a lot for me to even label it as abuse. I remember the first time I actually referred to it for what it actually was, and I almost couldn't believe it. It was such a crazy realization. It's terrible because I almost felt embarrassed to refer to it as abuse. It made me feel weak, and it made me feel like a victim. And that is something that I have always wanted to steer away from. Now, being able to label this person as an abuser, and being able to label her actions as abusive really brought me more guilt and shame, and I feel like I've always felt like it was my fault that I lived through that. I feel like when I even thought about leaving, it would break my heart, and I would feel so ashamed for even thinking about it because I felt so deeply for them. I felt bad to be the one to give up on them, essentially.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that it's a difficult subject to touch on, but like you said, in that moment, you felt guilt and shame because you almost felt responsible for them.
I did.
You felt like it was your responsibility to make sure they were okay, and you forgot to prioritize yourself in that moment.
Exactly.
And so you have to remember that you're not responsible for others. As hard as it is, I feel like you have such a loving and caring heart, and you have to tell yourself sometimes that it's okay. You don't have to always go and take care of others, especially when they're hurting you.
Right.
I can see why you felt guilt when you guys finally decided to put an end to that relationship. But it's not your fault. What you went through and your experiences, it's not your fault.
I feel like that's definitely something that I worked on, and
Yeah.
it's something that I've struggled with, but I feel like
You
I
have
don't
to
feel as responsible anymore. I still struggle a bit with a lot of things, but
you still have to empathize with yourself when it comes to, because sometimes I know I actually myself, I was in an abusive relationship as well. And so a lot of times you feel guilty for staying in that relationship for so long. It's like you tell yourself, why did you do that? But then at the same time, you're also kind of like feeling guilty while you're in it for the other person.
And you know
So-
what aches me?
What?
It aches me so much. it aches me to then be shamed by other people for staying in that relationship.
Oh yeah.
I feel like we've both been shamed and misunderstood because we stayed in that relationship. And I feel like unless you've experienced it, unless you've been in a abusive relationship yourself, you will never
Mm-mm.
ever understand why it is that
It's so
someone
hard.
like us
Yeah.
stays in it, and why someone like us can't leave it.
It's really, really hard, honestly. But we
Mhm.
have to forgive ourselves. And we have to be compassionate with ourselves. And we have to love ourselves.
We do.
That's what we have
You
to
really
do.
do.
But
It's crazy, honestly, looking back on all of that and like how far I've come from it. Yeah, it's definitely taken a while to heal myself from that guilt and shame that I experienced because of that trauma and just all of it, you know.
I'm like, I know I went on to like a very.
It's like a bittersweet feeling, I feel like. And speaking about it, I felt a little heavy, but then
That's how I was like,
it's
thank
also
you for
like
talking
a
about
relief
that.
to let it out.
I'm really proud of you for sharing your experience because I know it's
Thank you.
one that you have really struggled with, and for you to say that you felt guilt when you were thinking about even leaving that relationship.
Right.
It says a lot about who you are, and I feel like you're always putting others first, and you just have to love yourself, honey.
It's just terrible
yourself
because,
first,
you
no matter
know,
what.
we both have really big hearts.
We do.
And it's gotten me into a lot of unhealthy relationships, and it's put me
Even friendships.
it's put me in really bad situations, but in
Yeah.
friendships too.
Mm-hmm. So, I want to wrap this up because we're running low on time today.
And we're hungry. Again,
And we're hungry.
we're starving, so.
But again, remorse comes from the heart, guys. Please remember that. Remorse comes from the heart. Guilt springs from your ego mind. Remorse is a feeling of regret, whereas guilt is only acknowledging that you did something wrong. It is so
Yes.
important to take a step back, take full acknowledgement and responsibility for your actions. And if you hurt someone, please take the time to listen to them and give them the apology that they deserve.
And I know, you know, I've hurt people in my life, so I know
We
what it's
all have hurt
like
people.
to feel terrible about hurting someone. But again, they deserve something better, and they like you said, they deserve a proper apology. And even if it may be the most uncomfortable thing to give it, please do give it, because by giving it, you'll get that person a step closer to healing.
And not just that, but yourself too.
Exactly.
You'll stop living with that feeling of guilt. You'll stop feeling that feeling of anxiety or
Shame,
paranoia, because you know what you did was wrong, but you can't stand up and take responsibility for it. So don't just do it for them, but do it for you. Do it so that you can have peace of mind also.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, well,
I'm hungry.
can I say my joke now?
Yes, go ahead.
To sum this all up, do the right thing, because if you don't, you're going to rot. You're going to be that rotten apple that no one wants to eat.
Harsh
Aww.
truth. Barbara.
It was
Barbara
better the first time.
Oh gosh. But yes, guys, don't allow these things to just take the best parts of you. We're all better than that.
We are, and
There's always more space for growth. There's always more space for love and compassion.
spread the love.
So with that being said, we're going to close this out. We're going to go get some tacos, and we will see you guys.
Tacos or tacos?
Tacos. We're going to go get some tacos, and we will see you guys on Tuesday. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.